The instant I stepped through the entrance of that grand ballroom, her voice reached my ears. Verity Ashford, my brother's immaculate bride-to-be, was tilting toward her bridesmaids with a flute of sparkling wine balanced delicately in her manicured fingers. Her murmur carried deliberately across the space, and I understood completely that she intended it that way. Oh, wonderful. The smelly farm girl decided to show up. Her companions erupted in laughter like a cluster of cackling creatures wrapped in couture gowns. Verity never even bothered directing her gaze toward me when those words left her mouth. I was that insignificant to her. Simply some humiliation that had crawled out of a rural backwater to tarnish the perfection of her flawless engagement celebration. What Verity remained completely unaware of, what not a single soul in that venue understood, was that I had put my signature on the ownership papers of this establishment 3 years prior, the Sterling Grand Hotel. Every crystal fixture dangling above her styled hair, every utensil she was using to consume her appetizers, every single inch of imported stone beneath her ridiculously expensive stilettos was mine. And before this evening concluded, that careless whisper was going to strip away everything she had ever desired. My name is Hadley Mercer. I reached 32 this past spring, and I spent my formative years in Bellbrook, a community in rural Virginia so minuscule that our only noteworthy traffic incident occurred when Farmer Hutchins's cattle broke loose and obstructed the main road for nearly 4 hours. I departed from that place at 18, and I genuinely never glanced backward. Not because I harbored resentment toward my origins, but because my relatives made abundantly evident that I occupied no space in their world. You see, I possess an older brother, Preston, the favored son, the child who existed beyond criticism. Throughout my childhood, every accomplishment I achieved was held against his standard, and I perpetually fell beneath it. When I earned an A, Preston had secured an A+. When I made the volleyball roster, Preston had captained his squad. My mother, Constance, possessed this particular manner of regarding me that communicated I was merely a preliminary sketch, while Preston represented the completed masterpiece. So, I departed. I stuffed a single bag, boarded a bus bound for the metropolitan area, and commenced rebuilding with nothing beyond $200 and an obstinate determination to succeed. Everyone in my hometown assumed I was floundering. They envisioned me cramped in some minuscule dwelling surviving on packaged ramen, which accurately described my initial 2 years. However, what escaped their knowledge was that I secured employment as a housekeeper at an intimate luxury inn, and that position transformed the trajectory of my existence. I absorbed everything. I observed. I analyzed. I progressed from scrubbing suites to manning the reception to assistant director to director. I preserved every dollar, placed investments judiciously, executed intelligent decisions, and embraced calculated risks when my instincts approved. By 29, I possessed my inaugural property. By 31, I controlled 3. Now at 32, I operate Meridian Hospitality Group, an enterprise commanding 7 boutique accommodations spanning the Atlantic seaboard. The Sterling Grand represents my centerpiece, my source of immense satisfaction. But here's the reality about constructing something from absolutely nothing. You discover the value of remaining silent. You recognize that others diminish your worth, and occasionally that underestimation becomes your most formidable advantage. So, I maintained my secret from relatives. They never inquired regardless. In their perception, I remained the faltering younger sister, who couldn't compete with Preston and his mid-tier position at some financial services corporation. The contradiction was so substantial you could practically taste it. This evening, I received notification of Preston's engagement celebration. Delivered at the final moment, naturally, almost certainly my mother's notion. A guilt-driven summons, so she could inform her acquaintances that every family member attended. I nearly declined, but something drew me here. Perhaps inquisitiveness. Perhaps some persistent optimistic fragment hoping circumstances had evolved. They had not. I positioned myself at the threshold of my own establishment, dressed in denim and my beloved riding boots, my hair still carrying the subtle fragrance of the countryside because I had traveled through Bellbrook during my journey here, simply to reconnect with my origins. My attire probably exceeded the combined value of everything adorning Verity's frame, but appearances wouldn't reveal that truth. That's the nature of genuine wealth. It has no requirement to announce itself. And truthfully, you can relocate the girl from agricultural land, but you cannot extract the agricultural land from the girl. Though, you can certainly transport that farm girl's earnings directly to financial institutions. I identified my mother positioned across the venue holding audience with several of her companions, undoubtedly extolling Preston's magnificent fiancé and their magnificent prospects together. Preston stood adjacent to Verity, appearing like a gentleman who had claimed a lottery prize. He remained oblivious that he clutched a worthless ticket. Verity eventually directed her attention my way, her grin cutting like a blade's edge. She failed to recognize me as anything beyond an irritation, a blemish marring her impeccable evening. That suited me perfectly. Let her perceive me as insignificant. Let every person present share that perception. I had discovered ages ago that the finest retribution arrives without fanfare. It demonstrates patience. It operates in silence. It involves watching individuals excavate their personal destruction while they're too occupied with condescension to observe the implement in their own grasp. So, I returned her smile, proceeded to the bar, and requested a beverage. My employees understood not to acknowledge my identity. Thornton Wells, my general director, captured my attention from the opposite side of the venue and delivered a discreet acknowledgement. Everything was proceeding flawlessly. Everything appeared pristine. For the moment. Because in approximately 3 hours, Verity Ashford would receive an education in a crucial principle. Never dismiss the capabilities of the rural girl, particularly when she holds the deed to the floor supporting your weight. Prior to continuing, if you're finding enjoyment in this narrative, please activate that subscribe function and share in the comments your location and current time. I observe every individual comment, and it holds tremendous significance for me. Thank you immensely for your encouragement. Now, returning to the narrative. The engagement celebration precisely matched expectations for someone of Verity's disposition. Lavish, excessive, constructed to dazzle individuals already self-impressed. There were frozen sculptures fashioned into elegant birds, a cascading champagne display that seemed extravagant even by cascading champagne display standards, and sufficient floral arrangements to provoke envy from a conservatory. My hotel personnel had executed magnificently, which generated pride within me, despite my desire to express exasperation at every aesthetic selection Verity had implemented. I collected my beverage and located a secluded area for observation. That's when my mother discovered me. Constance Mercer approached resembling a woman who had detected something disagreeable and was attempting to identify its origin. She examined me from crown to sole, her vision halting at my footwear with evident censure. She commented that it was pleasant I could attend, her inflection implying it was anything except pleasant. Then she questioned why I couldn't have selected something more suitable, noting that Verity's relatives were extremely cultivated. She emphasized cultivated as though it were terminology I should memorize. I explained I had arrived directly from my occupation and lacked opportunity to change attire, which held accuracy. I simply omitted that occupation signified directing a multi-million-dollar hospitality corporation. My mother exhaled in the manner she perpetually exhaled regarding me, as though I represented a persistent failure she had adapted to endure. She instructed me to at minimum attempt, creating a favorable impression on the Ashfords, then vanished back among the attendees to resume her social responsibilities. And there it existed. 20 seconds of exchange, and I already experienced the sensation of being 12 once more, falling short of some imperceptible benchmark I was never informed existed. I observed Verity across the space, distributing superficial embraces through a cluster of attendees. The woman had pressed her lips to more cheeks this evening than a campaigning official at a community gathering. Every movement was computed, every expression calibrated for optimal impact. Her parents, Harrison and Cordelia Ashford, positioned themselves nearby like satisfied aristocrats, observing their prized progeny navigate the gathering. Harrison was a substantial gentleman with a flushed complexion, and the variety of assurance that originates from either authentic achievement or exceptional performance. Cordelia was slender, refined, adorned with gems that captured illumination with each motion. They presented as affluent. They conducted themselves as affluent, but something regarding them registered as incorrect, like an exquisite artwork suspended marginally askew. I couldn't precisely identify it yet, but I would. Preston eventually observed me and navigated over. My elder brother, 3 years my senior, still regarding me as though I were his bothersome younger sibling who trailed him during our youth. He expressed pleasure that I could attend, though his manner suggested he hadn't registered whether I was present or absent. He inquired if I'd encountered Verity yet, and declared she was extraordinary. I confirmed I'd noticed her. I retained my assessments internally. Preston nodded, already surveying past me to determine who else required greeting. Certain patterns never alter. Then he uttered something that caused my interior to constrict. He mentioned that Mother had presented Verity with grandmother's heirloom as an engagement offering. He asked, "Wasn't that magnanimous of her?" and noted that Verity absolutely treasured it. I sensed the atmosphere evacuate my lungs. Grandmother's heirloom. The vintage pendant our grandmother had designated specifically for me prior to her passing. She had clasped my hand and expressed it was intended for me because I was her visionary, her warrior, the one who would accomplish something meaningful. My mother possessed awareness of this. She had occupied that room when grandmother spoke those words, and she bestowed it upon Verity regardless. I gazed across the venue and detected it. There it hung, encircling Verity's throat as though it rightfully belonged there. My grandmother's pendant, my legacy, my remembrance, gleaming beneath the chandelier radiance, while Verity laughed at someone's remark. The music operator amplified the volume until I could perceive my dental work vibrating. If I desired my teeth unsettled, I would have simply visited my orthodontist. At minimum, there I'd receive complimentary hygiene products from the experience. I excused myself from Preston and proceeded toward the facilities, requiring a moment to respire. That's when I passed Harrison Ashford in the corridor, his phone compressed against his ear, his countenance rigid with tension. He failed to observe me. He was excessively concentrated on his discussion. I perceived him stating they required this marriage to proceed, that the Mercer family possessed sufficient finances to address their circumstances. He paused, receiving input from whoever occupied the other connection. Then he declared they simply needed to endure the ceremony. And subsequently, everything would resolve itself. He terminated the call and returned toward the celebration, his vendor's grin sliding back into position like a disguise. I remained motionless in that corridor, my grandmother's pendant momentarily forgotten, supplanted by something considerably more pressing. The Mercer family possessed finances. What finances? My parents maintained a respectable residence, certainly, but I knew as fact there existed a second lien against it, because I'd been covertly eliminating that obligation for the previous 4 years. Preston earned a reasonable salary. Nothing extraordinary. No family fortune existed. So why did Harrison Ashford believe otherwise? And more critically, what precisely was their circumstance that demanded addressing? I invested the subsequent hour observing the Ashfords like a predator monitors prey. Every grin, every handshake, every precisely timed chuckle. Now that I recognized something was amiss, I could perceive the fractures in their performance. Harrison repeatedly examined his phone, his jaw tensing with every message he reviewed. Cordelia's jewelry was remarkable, but I noticed she continuously touched it anxiously, as though concerned it might vanish. And Verity, stunning, flawless Verity, possessed a veracity in her gaze that related nothing to affection and everything to desperation. I commenced assembling the fragments. The Ashfords believed my family possessed wealth. But why? Then recognition struck me. For the previous 4 years, I had been transmitting funds to my parents anonymously through my enterprise, Meridian Hospitality Group. Each month, a payment would materialize to satisfy the mortgage, the utility expenses, the healthcare costs. When my father underwent his hip procedure, I never attached my identity to it. I didn't desire their appreciation or their inquiries. I simply wanted to assist from a remove. But my parents remained ignorant it was me. And evidently, my mother had concluded it must be Preston. Naturally, she did. In her perception, her golden offspring was secretly providing for them, being the responsible, accomplished son she perpetually knew he was. I could practically perceive her boasting to her companions about how magnanimous Preston was, how he consistently cared for his family, the funds I transmitted, the sacrifices I rendered. And Preston received the recognition. The contradiction was so dense it could have entered the celebration and ordered its own beverage. So, the Ashfords conducted their investigation. They observed a pleasant residence with no apparent mortgage payments. They perceived Constance extolling her son's investments. They observed a family that seemed to possess concealed affluence. And they selected Preston like predators detecting vulnerability in the waters. But here's the complication with their scheme. The funds weren't Preston's. No family fortune existed. The Ashfords were pursuing an illusion. And when they uncovered the reality, my relatives would be abandoned with nothing except the consequences. Unless someone intervened. I located Thornton Wells adjacent to the service passage, clipboard in possession, supervising the catering personnel. He elevated his gaze when I approached, his professional facade yielding to authentic warmth when he recognized me. He quietly inquired if everything was satisfactory, addressing me as Ms. Mercer before I directed a look toward him. He amended himself and simply used Hadley. I informed him I required assistance. I needed background intelligence on the Ashford family. Whatever he could uncover. Business documentation, press coverage, anything publicly accessible. Thornton didn't inquire why. That's what I valued about him. He simply acknowledged and stated he'd examine what he could discover. He vanished with his phone already activated. I returned to the celebration attempting to behave normally, which was becoming increasingly challenging by the minute. That's when Verity located me. She materialized beside me like a couture-clad specter, her grin so saccharine it could induce dental problems. She proposed we should converse, simply the two of us, to become acquainted. She placed her hand upon my arm as though we were longtime companions. I permitted her to guide me toward a secluded corner near the restrooms. The instant we were beyond hearing distance of other attendees, her grin evaporated as though it had never existed. She informed me she possessed knowledge about me. She declared she knew I transmitted funds home monthly, performing the dutiful daughter from afar. But here's what perplexed her. She questioned why someone who could scarcely afford their own dwelling would transmit funds to relatives who didn't even appreciate them. I sensed my jaw tighten, but maintained my expression neutral. She proceeded. Unless, she suggested, I was attempting to purchase their affection. Attempting to demonstrate I possessed value. Truly pitiful, she informed me. She inclined nearer and declared I should understand that Preston had disclosed everything to her. How I perpetually envied him. How I couldn't tolerate not being the preferred child. How the family merely tolerated me from sympathy. She displayed another grin, but this time it was cutting and vicious. She declared she intended to marry Preston, become integrated into this family. And honestly, she believed it would benefit everyone if I simply maintained distance. She claimed nobody would notice my absence. She labeled me unnecessary burden. Then she patted my arm as though consoling a youngster and departed. I remained there for a moment, processing what had just transpired. Verity believed I was impoverished. She believed the funds originated from Preston. She possessed no awareness of my actual identity. It resembled observing someone boast about how magnificent their leased vehicle is to the individual who owns the complete automotive empire. Honestly, if conceit consumed calories, Verity Ashford would be transparent. Thornton materialized at my side, startling me from my contemplations. He extended a folder to me and stated I needed to examine this. His countenance was ashen, his customary composure disrupted. He declared the Ashfords weren't merely in debt, they were under investigation for fraud. I unsealed the folder directly there in the corridor, surveying the documents within. Financial records, court submissions, press articles. The more I examined, the more frigid I became. The Ashfords weren't who they professed to be. Their property empire was a fragile construction erected on deception and other people's funds. They were 6 months from insolvency and federal examination. This union wasn't about affection. It was an escape strategy. I transported the folder to my vehicle in the parking structure, requiring privacy to absorb what I was examining. The overhead illumination flickered as though sharing my astonishment. The documents depicted an ugly tableau. Harrison and Cordelia Ashford had been operating what essentially constituted a pyramid scheme for years. They collected funds from investors for property developments that either didn't exist or were tremendously overvalued. Early investors received compensation with funds from subsequent investors. The classic deception. But the fragile structure was finally disintegrating. Investors were posing questions. Auditors were circling. Federal investigators had initiated a case. The Ashfords required an exit strategy, and rapidly. Enter my brother Preston. I could perceive their reasoning, distorted as it was. Locate a family that appeared to possess wealth, marry into it, utilize the connection to reinforce their deteriorating standing, or at minimum have somewhere to conceal themselves when everything collapsed. They probably intended to drain whatever assets my family possessed before vanishing to commence the deception elsewhere. What they didn't realize was that my family possessed nothing. The residence was mortgaged. Preston's salary was unremarkable. The only funds flowing into the Mercer household originated from me, and I could terminate that with a single communication. The Ashfords were about to discover they had selected the incorrect family, and when they did, they would abandon Preston more rapidly than a vessel taking water, leaving my brother devastated and my parents humiliated. Part of me desired to permit it to unfold. Let them all endure the consequences of their decisions. My mother who surrendered my inheritance without hesitation. My brother who never once advocated for me. Let them experience what it feels like to be discarded, disregarded, cast aside. But I couldn't proceed with that. As much as they had wounded me, they remained my family. Preston remained the boy who instructed me in bicycle riding, even if he had forgotten that somewhere along the journey. My mother remained the woman who stayed awake through the night when I contracted measles, even if she subsequently decided I wasn't worth remembering. Family is complicated. You can care for people and be incensed with them simultaneously. You can desire to shield them even when they don't merit it. So, I reached a conclusion. I was going to expose the Ashfords. I was going to rescue my family from a catastrophe they didn't even recognize was approaching. And I was going to execute it my way. I contacted my attorney first. Margot Sinclair answered on the second ring despite it being 8 hours in the evening, which is why I compensated her what I did. I provided her a summary of the situation and inquired how rapidly she could verify the information in the folder. She stated she'd have confirmation within the hour. Next, I contacted Iris Caldwell, a forensic accountant I had collaborated with on a complicated acquisition 2 years prior. Iris was a genius with financial records, the variety of person who could examine a spreadsheet and determine what someone consumed for their morning meal. I transmitted her photographs of the critical documents and requested she investigate deeper. If you're enjoying this narrative thus far, please take merely 1 second to provide a like and leave a comment. It genuinely assists me continue creating these narratives for you, and I sincerely appreciate every single one of you. Thank you from the depths of my heart. Now, let's return to Hadley. Iris contacted me back in 40 minutes. Her voice was taut with the enthusiasm of someone who had uncovered something significant. She informed me I was correct. They were operating a pyramid scheme, textbook methodology. But here's the intriguing element. She mentioned she had researched the Ashford name in other states and discovered something in Nevada from 3 years prior. Same pattern, same scheme, different identities. She declared the bride's actual name wasn't Verity. She inquired if I was prepared for this. I confirmed I was prepared. Iris informed me the bride's actual name was Vanessa Aldrich. She explained the parents weren't even her genuine parents. They were associates in a lengthy deception, and they had been executing this for at minimum a decade. Different identities, different targets, identical scheme. I sat in my vehicle, the folder in my lap, and commenced laughing. I couldn't restrain myself. These individuals possessed more identities than a film actress has former spouses. Vanessa, Verity, probably planning to be Victoria next year. My phone vibrated with a message from Preston. I examined it for an extended moment before opening it. He desired to know if we could converse. He mentioned something about Verity felt incorrect. The manner Harrison kept disappearing. The manner Verity deflected every inquiry about her history. He stated perhaps he was being paranoid. I gazed at the message for an extended moment. Part of me desired to respond, to inform him to trust his instincts, to caution him about what was approaching. But what would that achieve? He had 35 years to trust me, to include me, to treat me as family. He selected not to. Besides, if I cautioned him now, he might caution Verity, and I couldn't permit that. I composed a simple response. I informed him we would converse after the toast, and to simply wait. 8:56. Harrison Ashford was adjusting his necktie near the compact stage where the music operator had established equipment. He appeared confident again, his vendor's disguise firmly positioned. He possessed no awareness of what was about to transpire. I contemplated what Verity had declared to me earlier, how I was unnecessary burden, how nobody would notice my absence, how I should simply maintain distance. The amusing aspect about individuals who underestimate you is that they never observe you approaching. They're so preoccupied looking down that they miss the moment you ascend. 8:59. Harrison stepped onto the platform and accepted the microphone. The music operator reduced the volume. Attendees rotated to face him, champagne flutes in grasp, prepared to toast the happy couple. I established eye contact with Thornton across the venue. He delivered an almost imperceptible acknowledgement. The screens behind the stage illuminated, currently displaying a slideshow of Preston and Verity's photographs. Happy couple at a restaurant. Happy couple at the shore. Happy couple living their happy deception. Not for much longer. Harrison cleared his throat and commenced speaking. He said good evening to everyone, and expressed gratitude that they could all be present to celebrate this beautiful union. He declared when his daughter first brought Preston home, he recognized immediately that this young gentleman was special. I nearly laughed. His daughter. The daughter who wasn't his daughter. The daughter whose actual name he probably had to remind himself of every morning. Harrison continued speaking about family, about legacy, about how honored the Ashfords were to join the Mercer family. He spoke about bright futures and grandchildren and constructing something enduring together. Every word was a falsehood, and every falsehood was about to be revealed. Harrison elevated his glass. He announced to the happy couple, to love, to family, to forever. I extracted my phone and transmitted Thornton a single word. Now. The screens flickered. For an instant, everyone probably assumed it was a technical malfunction. The happy photographs of Preston and Verity vanished, replaced by something else entirely. A document. Official appearing. Stamped with court seals and legal terminology. Harrison's grin solidified on his face. The document was a court filing from Nevada, dated 3 years prior. A fraud investigation. And there, listed as a person of interest, was a name nobody in this room had heard before. Vanessa Aldrich. A murmur rippled through the crowd. People squinted at the screens attempting to understand what they were witnessing. Harrison fumbled with the microphone, his countenance transitioning from flushed to pale in seconds. He declared there must be some error and called it a technical malfunction. He turned toward the AV booth and shouted for someone to correct it. But the screens continued changing. Another document appeared. Financial records displaying investor funds being channeled into shell companies. Then another. Press articles about a property scheme in Reno that had cost dozens of families their life savings. Then photographs. A younger Vanessa Aldrich. Different hair color. Same cold eyes. Standing next to Harrison and Cordelia at some charitable event under completely different names. Verity stood frozen in the center of the dance floor, her champagne flute trembling in her grasp. For the first time all evening, her disguise had completely slipped. She appeared terrified. Preston stared at the screens, then at Verity, then back at the screens. I could observe his mind functioning, pieces connecting. The doubt he had experienced all evening suddenly making horrible sense. Harrison attempted to push through the crowd toward the exit, but 2 of my security personnel stepped into his path. Cordelia seized his arm, whispering frantically, but there was nowhere to go. That's when I stepped forward. I walked through the parting crowd toward the platform, my boots clicking on the marble floor. Every eye in the room turned to me. The rural girl. The nobody. The unnecessary burden. Thornton's voice came over the speakers, calm and professional. He announced, "Ladies and gentlemen, He would like to introduce the owner of the Sterling Grand Hotel and CEO of Meridian Hospitality Group. He announced, "Please welcome Miss Hadley Mercer." The silence that followed was deafening. My mother's face went white. Preston's jaw actually dropped open. Even Verity, in the midst of her panic, appeared genuinely shocked. I accepted the microphone from Harrison's limp grasp. I said good evening to everyone. I apologized for the interruption, but I thought they might want to know who they were really celebrating tonight. I gestured to the screens behind me. I declared Harrison and Cordelia Ashford were not who they claimed to be. Their property empire was a fraud. Their wealth was stolen from innocent investors. And their daughter Verity was actually named Vanessa Aldrich, a con artist who had been running the same scheme for over a decade. Verity finally found her voice. She screamed that I was lying. She called me a jealous, pathetic nobody. She declared I was fabricating this because I couldn't stand to see Preston happy. I smiled at her. I said that was interesting. And I inquired if I also fabricated the federal investigation that had been following them for 2 years. I mentioned the arrest warrants that were issued last month in Nevada. And I expressed curiosity how I could have faked the fact that Agent Miriam Crawford and her team were currently waiting outside this hotel. As if on cue, the ballroom doors opened. 4 individuals in suits walked in. Badges visible. Expressions all business. Verity's face crumbled. Harrison tried to run. He made it about 10 feet before Agent Crawford intercepted him with a calm but firm hand on his shoulder. She informed him that Harrison Ashford, or whatever his real name was under arrest for wire fraud, investment fraud, and conspiracy. Cordelia started crying, mascara running down her carefully styled face. She kept saying there was a mistake, that they could explain everything, that it wasn't what it looked like. Verity, Vanessa, whatever her name was, turned to Preston one last time. Her voice was desperate, pleading. She asked if he was really going to let his sister do this to them. She declared they loved each other, that he had to believe her. Preston looked at her for an extended moment. I could observe the war happening behind his eyes. The woman he thought he loved versus the evidence he couldn't deny. Then he did something I never expected. He stepped away from her. He declared he didn't even know who she was. His voice was quiet, broken, but certain. He stated he didn't know who any of them were. Verity's expression shifted from desperation to rage in an instant. She lunged toward me, screaming that I had ruined everything, that I was supposed to be nobody, that I was just the smelly farm girl. Security caught her before she reached me. I leaned close enough for only her to hear. I declared this smelly farm girl owned the room she was standing in, paid the salary of everyone who was about to escort her out, and would sleep very well tonight knowing exactly who she was. They led her away still screaming, her designer dress wrinkled, her perfect hair destroyed, her entire carefully constructed life falling apart with every step. I turned back to the stunned crowd, most of whom were still trying to process what had just happened. I said, well, the catering was already paid for, and it seemed like a shame to waste good food. I informed them the bar would stay open for anyone who wanted to stick around. Nervous laughter rippled through the room. The music operator, bless his heart, started playing something upbeat. The engagement party was over. But the night was just beginning. The next hour felt like something out of a fever dream. The Ashfords, all 3 of them, were escorted out in handcuffs while the remaining attendees watched in stunned silence. Verity, or Vanessa, or whoever she would be in her next life, was still screaming threats as they put her in the back of an unmarked vehicle. Something about attorneys, lawsuits, revenge, empty words from an empty person. She went from future Mrs. Mercer to future prison inmate in under 15 minutes. That had to be some kind of record, even for a professional con artist. Inside the ballroom, the mood had shifted from shock to something else. Curiosity, maybe. Fascination. A few attendees were already on their phones, probably sharing what had just happened with everyone they knew. By morning, this story would be all over town. Preston found me near the bar. He looked like a man who had just woken up from a nightmare, only to realize he was still dreaming. His eyes were red, his hands shaky, his entire world view clearly shattered. He asked how I knew. His voice cracked on the words. He asked how I figured it out. I told him I listened. I said I watched. I paid attention. All the things I had been doing my entire life while everyone else ignored me. He was quiet for a moment. Then he said he was sorry. He said he knew that didn't cover it, that it didn't cover years of treating me like an afterthought. But he was sorry. I studied my brother's face, looking for the catch, the angle. But all I saw was genuine remorse. Maybe for the first time ever. I told him sorry was a start. We stood there in silence. Two siblings who had spent decades as strangers, finally seeing each other clearly. Then my mother appeared. Constance Mercer looked smaller somehow, like the events of the evening had physically shrunk her. She approached slowly, uncertainly, none of her usual confidence on display. She started to say she didn't know, but I cut her off. I pulled out my phone and showed her the screen. Bank records, transfer receipts, 4 years of payments to her mortgage company, her utility providers, her medical bills, all from Meridian Hospitality, all from me. I told her she thought Preston was supporting them. I said she bragged to everyone about her generous, successful son. I let that hang in the air for a moment. Before I said it was me, it was always me. My mother stared at the phone, then at me, then back at the phone. Her mouth opened and closed several times, but no words came out. I said I didn't do it for thanks. I said I did it because they were my family, even when they made me feel like I wasn't theirs. But I thought she should know the truth about who was actually there for her. Constance's eyes filled with tears. Not the dramatic, performative tears I had seen her use at family events. Real ones. The kind that came from somewhere deep. She whispered my name. Hadley. Like she was saying it for the first time. Before I could respond, there was a commotion near the dance floor. I turned to see it. Grandmother's pendant. My grandmother's pendant. Lying on the ground where Verity had thrown it during her meltdown. Preston walked over and picked it up carefully, like it might break. He looked at it for an extended moment, then walked back to me. He said this was always supposed to be mine. His voice was thick with emotion. He said he didn't know Mother gave it away. He said he was sorry. He placed the pendant in my hand. The weight of it felt right, like something that had been missing for years was finally back where it belonged. My mother watched the exchange with tears streaming down her face. She said she had been so wrong about everything. I didn't disagree with her, but I didn't pile on either. There would be time for difficult conversations later. Right now I was just tired. An attendee wandered over and asked if the party was still happening, looking confused but hopeful. I looked around the room. The ice sculptures were melting. The champagne fountain was still flowing. Half the guests had left, but the other half seemed determined to get their money's worth from the open bar. I shrugged and signaled the music operator to keep playing. Might as well. The night had already been weird enough. What was a little dancing going to hurt? 3 weeks later, I sat in my office at the Sterling Grand Hotel, looking out at the city skyline. The morning sun was streaming through the windows, and for the first time in years, I felt at peace. The Ashfords were finished. Federal prosecutors had enough evidence to charge them with multiple counts of fraud, money laundering, and conspiracy. Vanessa Aldrich, the woman who had called me a smelly farm girl, was in custody awaiting trial. Her bail had been set high enough that even her fake wealthy parents couldn't afford it. Turns out when you spend decades stealing from people, you don't have many friends willing to help when things go wrong. The story made local news for about a week. Hotel mogul exposes con artists at family.